Hello, product people. Welcome to the Product for Product podcast, hosted by Matt Green, data advocate and product manager, and Moshe and Ken, product leader and author. Our goal is to serve the product community by helping you find products that can help make your work in product management easier. Thanks for joining us on another episode of the Product for Product podcast.
Welcome back. Today we're talking experimentation with Optimizely. We're happy to have Ken Hanson back on the show to tell us about what he's been up to and how he's using the tool. How's it going, Ken?
Pretty good, man. Pretty good. Just enjoying the new gig and getting to use Optimizely again. It's a great tool.
Awesome. Happy to have you back.
Yeah. Hey, Ken. Hey, Matt. This is really like it's the third time you are with us, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
You're taking the lead.
Pretty awesome.
Like coming home.
Pretty soon you might be our third co-host. Who knows?
Nice.
Cool. So tell us where you are and what you've been to since the last time we talked with you.
Previously, I was working for a influencer platform company, LTK or reward style, depending on which branding you're familiar with. But I have since moved on from being a technical PM of MarTech for them, and then have moved into becoming a senior PM of conversion for Splash Financial. They're a Series B startup, pretty rapidly moving towards Series C, I think, especially if I do my job right. And then
Nice.
they help students refinance their loans really easily with a lot of automated underwriting and various API connections to help you move through all the complicated pieces of getting your pre-approvals and your post-qualifications wrapped up really quickly with low effort. And then my function there is to really focus on smoothing out all the data entry you have to do and focusing on conversion rate. So, how fast can I get you to getting money in your bank account?
That's always important.
Yeah. You guys in America do need that.
Absolutely.
Speak.
I mean, it's not like it's free in Canada to go to school, but
Sure.
The prices are not as much as you
Not
guys.
as steep as they are here.
Yeah.
They're pretty intense here.
Yeah.
I'm really just excited that they have helped so many people be able to refi into like really, really, really good rates. And
That's a very important thing these days, for sure.
Definitely.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's just nothing like the money monkey on your back that just can like really ruin
It's
your
perpetual
days.
almost.
So
It's like never ending these days. I was fortunate not to have to do too much, but nowadays kids coming out of college are just strapped with a lot of debt.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Definitely. So tell us about Optimizely. We're here today to hear about this A/B testing tool. And it's been a while in the market, and there's a lot of people using it. And you've been using it in a couple of places, right?
Yeah, definitely. When I was working for a startup, really a couple of startups, honestly, we were using their. So, okay, let me set the stage. Optimizely's got their product split into two. One is for the full stack, where you're going to need a dev 100% of the time. But it enables you to like full funnel omni-channel run experimentation. And then the other side of it is web, where it's more like the VWOs and the Google Optimizes. That's their product to go kind of toe to toe with all the visual editors that try and do no code solutions. That said, web, I have bent that tool in past experiments to do all kinds of wild stuff as somebody that's slightly dangerous at being a dev. And a very technical product manager. And so web, you shouldn't stop at what you see is what you get, is the only offering there. You can absolutely crack open the code of a web Optimizely experiment and do really complicated things inside of it. It's not as restrictive as Google Optimizes.
Okay, you're definitely on the more technical side of things. Does it also have a drag and drop functionality,
definitely.
wig kind of thing?
100%. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. And that's, I think, what most people are going to settle into.
Mm-hmm. You definitely go straight to the data, straight to the technical dev side. So yeah.
Yeah,
for sure.
I prefer that usually, but like sometimes it's just if you know just enough to be dangerous with some JavaScript and can read some documentation, like you can save yourself a lot of time and ping pong between a dev and a PM of executing an experiment with web. So just I mainly want to say that just to say like Google Optimize can feel pretty restrictive. VWO can feel pretty restrictive when the only things you can change are what's available to you on that page, versus like manufacturing whole new chunks of pieces that don't exist in the code. And so like, I think Optimizely stands out a little bit more in that regard because I've used most of the other stuff. Like LTK was on a, not one I recommend, but Optimize. And then I've used a few other like experimentation platforms, including Optimizely and VWO and things like that, where I would bump into restrictions with using a WYSIWYG for experiment execution. Optimizely just offers that extra muscle if you can flex it. So I think that's a huge plus for
that sounds like it,
web
for sure.
Yeah, it's like any other thing in software that not everything can be developed on the back end and not everything can be developed on the front end.
Exactly. Yeah.
Each side has its own needs and strengths, and in the same way, that's why they will have both of those ends for experimentation. I actually used Optimizely probably 8 years ago. But back then they only supported the front end, and it was pretty cool to see and to use how you can WYSIWYGly change your interface and do tests. But it has its limitations, of course. So I definitely understand why they also added the backend part.
Yeah, and that's what we're using at Splash. So my previous experience was probably about 5-6 years ago, man, maybe even longer. I mean, we may have been using it at the same time, Moshe.
Could be.
But the full stack experience is fairly bare bones, and it's very clearly meant for technical teams. But being able to run an experiment that is inclusive of an entire omni-channel is pretty awesome. So you can have a user start on web, enter an experiment, and continue in through that experiment into the app kicking open, and then into like an email, and then into a landing page again, and then onto desktop, and you can see all that happening because you've got this access to this, ideally a technical team and the technical side of the Optimizely. So
that kind of leads me to think about the implementation of it.
Yep.
Were you part of the implementation? Was it there when you got there? And how difficult was it?
Yeah, this one's there when I got here, but the experimentation culture is being built up. And so it's fairly like as I would say it's an MVP of an Optimizely instrumentation. It's not really connected to a lot of data sources. And then additionally, like the other analytics stacks that we have here aren't also feeding into Optimizely. And so targeting gets really interesting right now. And so we're like really rapidly trying to, muscle up on the instrumentation side of things. But Optimizely full stack instrumentation is extensive. It's a big deal. It's a project for sure.
Okay.
And when you're saying it's a project, you mean also from implementation perspective of involvement of your team and resources and planning and all of that stuff?
Absolutely. Yeah. You really need to kind of organize the data that you need to ship in while trying to future-proof yourself to be able to know that you can target and isolate based on how you're going to maybe want to run things in the future. Certainly don't boil the ocean. I like that they went the MVP route and just tooled up just enough to identify users correctly. But, a lot of these tools really only become powerful, just like Andrew was talking about with VWO, they really only become powerful once you're feeding lots and lots of like user attribute data, event data into Optimizely.
Yeah, so give us an example, if you can, about an experiment that you did. And backend experiment will be very interesting to hear about because, most of the people we talked with are doing front-end experiments. They're easier to grasp, easier to set up and run. Tell us a bit about an example of something.
Yeah, so I think week 2, I got pulled into an experiment review because the experiment was going really badly when nobody really expected it to like go badly. And one of the I think one of the experiment setups there was when we list rates for you, how do we want to display it to you? And in this case, we really were trying to do just kind of I guess like they were just trying to vet the UI direction with statistical numbers and actually pushing users into it after having done some usability studies. Mm-hmm. And so, the setup there was you've got an if switch built into the code that's going to switch the UIs out. In this case, we switched the redirect URL from the loading screen of pulling your rates when you're qualifying for a loan. And so on one side, it was control. It's what we've always had. It's what has, a really well-known conversion rate. And then the new one, we just weren't really sure what it would do. But generally, we felt really good about it because it was a beautiful UI. And it really felt like going from, I don't know, like an old Wells Fargo bank loan page to like the Google Flights of listing rates out and being able to choose a really appealing rate. The experiment, unfortunately, didn't work out as well as we needed it to. And so, which is, a lot of learning can happen. Yeah. And it's one of the 3 expected results of an experiment, right? And so, but like the setup there was a couple of things. And really, there's only like 2 major primary things that you need to worry about when doing any sort of instrumentation. It's, what event metric are you trying to move? And make sure that Optimizely is firing that event metric at the moment of conversion based on whatever metric conversion you're looking for. And then, so eventing in general, and then just setting up the actual like serving up of the change. We've also used it to even like see what is the difference when we switch out the backend for something that loads much, much faster? Is there any impact on conversion rates there? And so like, because it's the full stack Optimizely, it enabled us to do a lot of like really interesting measurement for switching out that that backend that serves faster. And it actually did lift the conversion rate by 6 percentage points, which is fantastic in our world. Nice.
Yeah, absolutely.
1% really matters in the loan world. And so if you're bumping 6%, like it's a good day, but yeah, so that example of Google Flights UI versus old school kind of been around forever UI, the setup really is pretty interesting. On the dev side, and this is a kind of an Optimizely unique thing, but on the dev side, they don't have to really care about whether it's a feature flag or an experiment. Or what type of experiment. They get one value and one data call to deal with. And so it's very simplified for the dev. For the PM, it's more complicated. Not any more complicated than the other experiment design, but for the PM, you're worrying about like when and where and how and all those things. But once the devs understand what your goal is, it's very easy for them to implement as simple as an if switch. They do it much more elegantly than I'm describing it. But yeah, that's the gist of working with full stack Optimizely. Every single experiment you're going to run, you're going to go through that. What events do I need to fire to prove that this is working? And where, when, and how am I going to test this idea?
I believe that their feature flag functionality, they even, I don't know if it's still free, but I believe that they had it as a free package.
It is.
Oh, it's still free. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. So I was looking at that a year ago, maybe more. Mm-hmm. Then we ended up implementing something else. But on top of that, then that's, I guess, part of how they get you into optimize the platform. And then extending into the actual testing is where you pay for the license. So that's why I think I understand why you're saying it's a bit simpler for the developers, because they just implement it as a feature flag, and then you through I guess an Optimizely interface uses that flag to associate it with a test or something like that.
That's right. Yeah. So you take these feature flag variables that you're generating from the dashboard of Optimizely. So you create a switch basically, and then you decide, is this going to be an experiment? Is this going to be a feature flag? Is this going to be an AA test? Like, how do I want to do this with this variable? The dev really doesn't care. They're just dropping it in the code with those values and looking up the user's ID and Optimizely is returning them which variant they should be in, or whether they should be in the 20% rollout, or whether they should be in the control, et cetera. So I love that as a past dev, and knowing that you can really, litter a code base with gross old, switch cases. It's just not a good look inside of a code base typically, and most devs hate that, especially when you have like slight variations in each call. So they shouldn't need to worry about whether I'm trying to run an experiment or a feature flag. They should just really worry about which version the user's getting, regardless. And then I can go into the dashboard at that point as the PM and design the experiment or the feature flag, plan.
But eventually, after the experiment is done, or you decide which one is the winner and you want to use that,
yep,
they will still have to do a bit of a cleanup in the code anyway, right?
Oh yeah, definitely. And nobody's really safe from that. No tool really protects you from that when you're getting complicated with this experimentation stuff. And this one was pretty complicated. But yeah, that has to be part of your SDLC. So it's really all about going back in and ripping out the old stuff. What's great is, when you have a winner, you just go ahead and make that a permanent feature, and that stays on.
Right.
And then when that feature flag evaporates, Optimizely sees that it doesn't exist anymore, and goes ahead and drops the feature flag or the split test as far as being active and manipulatable. But it'll retain the results in the dashboard. So.
I see. And we asked this question also to Andrew. How do you balance with the developers, the work that you have to do to develop different options for the same feature?
Yeah. So Andrew and I are, if this wasn't obvious in the podcast, Andrew and I are thick as thieves. And we really cut our teeth on building experimentation teams and product discovery processes together at the same company. And so we come from the same school of thought. I think Andrew's totally right. Like, you shouldn't be launching enormous features all at once. You should only be building features that survive minimally viable testing. And so you're doing things like painted door tests, or just a bare minimum to identify the riskiest assumptions and test first. And then if it survives that stat sig and the conversion rate that you're looking for, then have the devs build it. But otherwise, what I tell my devs, and they know that I'm not opinionated about anything, programming wise, that they're going to produce. But what I work with and tell the devs is, don't make this code bulletproof. Like, make sure there's no bugs, but like, don't obsess about the cleanliness of the code and other things. This is likely going to fail, right? Like, let's start from that assumption always. This will likely fail. So how fast can you get me to clarity around an assumption?
Right.
That's what testing's for. The output and the goal really is learning, not perfect code that you can just switch or remove the old control code from and have it immediately work, right? I'd much rather the devs build really trashy code really fast, but bug free, and then launch it, and then let's make sure that it doesn't fail. And when it doesn't fail, now we lean in and we build out all the tickets and the epics and everything, and make sure it turns into a real boy and a real feature.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And for that, really, it's all about the planning of your test and to know what you want to test and how to test it, rather than which platform you're using for the testing. So that will be transferable across all the different platforms, I would guess. The question is then how easy Optimizely or another product that you use is for making it happen, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think Optimizely full stack, for what it is and what it promises, pretty easy. It's fairly simple to just dive in and understand kind of what it's trying to do if you're at all familiar with experimentation platforms. Even if you've just been shopping experimentation platforms, it feels very simple to like navigate their UI and read out test data. I think it gets pretty complicated though when you really deeply need to understand like what is flowing into Optimizely, how is it making its decisions, those sorts of things where, you know, you may have doubts about the instrumentation or the test design or, you know, any of that. But I wouldn't ever really blame that on Optimizely. That's just simply, you know, once you get to the point where you need a full stack tool, it's just complicated. It's just that like it starts complicated and it doesn't stop being complicated. And so you just kind of have to be comfortable living in that complication and try and design very clean, simple tests to work from. And then as you scale up, hopefully, you know, the complexity is being reduced with each step and each test you're running.
When you're doing these rapid tests, does Optimizely have a repository of your results to where if you wanted to go look back on it at some point in the future, or are you kind of recording this stuff in Google Docs or offline somewhere?
Yeah. So, you know, depending on the audience, you know, like I'll send my devs to the results in Optimizely. I'll send my other technical PMs into Optimizely to look at. Yeah, and they don't even have to be technical PMs. You know, PMs are comfortable running around in dashboards all day from various tools, right? But if I'm communicating it to a very broad audience, maybe people that aren't even on my team or my cross-functional team, or executives especially, pretty much with all the guys you've interviewed around experimentation, like I take it straight to, you know, a central repo of like Confluence. That Confluence for us is the playbook and the deep dive with, you know, executive summaries at the very top. But I also then produce really human language, 80-point font, very few words, slide decks to help, you know, disseminate the impact to the people that don't have time to, or, you know, have no need to like dig through all the data, you know. So, you know, one thing I like to do is like for each successful experiment on the cover slide, you know, put the variant, a screenshot on it to give people a visual reference, but then also write out one sentence about what the impact was. You know, in this case, it would be like, you know, switching the UI with this many assumptions involved created uncertainty in Y and also reduced the rate by X amount, right? Just in a giant font. That's where we start. And then everybody reads that, it kind of gets centered around that, and then they start digging in. But I think, you know, what's interesting is like a lot of these experimentation platform, you know, podcast questions, like they always sort of circle back around to test design and process. You know, like I would say like the tool matters very little, so long as you're able to do, you know, really clean tests. And, you know, once you need a backend or full stack tests going, does your tool support that? Beyond that, is it Bayesian or man, I haven't heard this term out loud before, by the way, so I might be pronouncing that wrong. But,
you did well. You did good.
Okay.
That's like me. I still can't say it.
I say Bayesian sometimes. So yeah.
Okay. I just pronounce it like I'm reading it in my head. But you know, is it that method, or is it this statistical method like frequentist, or is it, you know, in Optimizely's case, it's its own unique blend of stuff, which is super interesting. They're one of the few that aren't Bayes based.
Bayes, Bayes is it.
Yeah, that's really important probably to discuss at least. And I don't want to start you know, the debate around this, but I am a massive fan of Optimizely's stats engine. They spend an enormous time understanding why product managers peak at their results constantly, which typically is the death of a frequentist experiment. That's how you get your results totally wrong, and pick a false positive. But you know, they looked at that and said 90% of people that they interviewed across so many experiments run are peaking constantly and continually monitoring their experiment. And so they set out to solve that and worked with the Stanford stats team to build something based on frequentist, but it's based on the walled sequential test method, and then also sequential version of the Pearson-Neyman hypothesis testing approach. And then they aggressively control, not for, let me make sure I say this correctly. It's a combo of a different stats approach they call it Stats Engine, and there's an enormous amount of links on this approach, but their Stats Engine is using something closer to sequential testing, and with a Bayes flavor of a frequentist approach. But then they also are trying to control for the error discovery rate. And so they're kind of aggressive around helping you not get false positives, which is kind of the whole point of being in the business side of why you're doing experiments.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
You don't want to select the wrong choice.
Screw it all
and
up.
believe that it will go really well.
Yeah.
And then if you're peaking anyway, and they know you will, because so many people are going to do it regardless of whether they're going to make a choice or not, they're just constantly looking at it. They just went ahead and biased their method for that. And so what they did was they kind of stack rank metric goals. Your first one is your header goal. This is going to declare the success or failure of the experiment. Events goals 2 through 5 are going to be your secondary goals that will hit stat sig much slower. And then your additional eventing after that that's attached to the experiment, those are considered diagnostic eventing, and almost rarely will hit stat sig. But in that case, stat sig is not that important to those metrics, right? And so you shake out with a always on, always accurate stat sig value with their sequential testing methods and their AI involved with tossing out invalid spikes in data and starting things over with the next set of cohorts. And then everything else does it a little bit slower than that. And then eventually you get to essentially like I can peek at an experiment and have and know what my stat sig is at that exact moment, and not have any concern about whether stat sig can even be accurate yet or not, right? So it results in faster experimentation at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's interesting. They've taken their own approach to their stat blend.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
maybe that's a differentiator between these other products like BWO and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I think there's like a lot of debate around whether that even should matter, right? Most people don't understand either way. And then if you do understand both sides, like one can feel very inhuman and like legalistic, and then the other can feel a little bit more intuitive, but interestingly has other problems. And so like, yeah, I don't want to like tout that as like a big thing, but like the offering here is less about how accurate their stat sig ends up and the choice that you make, and more about being able to look at the stat sig at any moment and know that stat sig is accurate at that moment. And if you made a choice, you would be making a choice with this amount of risk, right? And so you can peak all day. Like you can test as many metrics as you want. They've like dealt with all the scenarios that people are actually dealing with. And then I know we're about to run out of time really quickly, because this came up in the previous podcast. Performance hit is almost nothing because they leave all their decisioning inside of CDNs. So you're getting served from an edge network that's closest to you, which variant you should be in at the moment you're looking at the page. And so the flash that is so common in experimentation tools that are only front end based, where you see the control for like a millisecond and then you see the variant, is almost non-existent. They have done some pretty interesting studies on comparisons and they've declared at least that they're the fastest. Now that's primarily with the full stack, but web also has very, very fast CDNs that serve out UIs, but you're still going to need to watch out for those performance hits. But it's not going to be like the Google optimized one where just dropping the script in, bloated everything out and slowed the page down. Optimized is very, very good at not slowing your page down. So
excellent. Thanks for bringing that up. Yeah, that was something we talked about with Andrew.
Yeah.
And I did want to ask you, things you like in the system. So I think you already mentioned a few of them.
So in short, I really love Optimizely a lot. But I think it's really important to point out that the Optimizely Web's like team orientation and team facilitation of testing velocity is really good. Web is actually much better than the full stack, team tools, right? And when I'm talking about, team tools, I'm really mainly focusing on things like ideation, collaboration, and dashboards and reporting. Those are really well done in the web version. There's what is akin to, I would say, the things that I end up creating in Confluence, that kind of all happens inside of that web tool to help teams organize around hypothesis testing. Not so much in full stack. You go full stack optimizely because you need the horsepower. Mm-hmm. And you are probably doing a lot of other things like porting the data somewhere else and doing analysis somewhere else, things like that. But in either regard, their decision engine for the risk and stat sig on the experiment is the same in both platforms. But I am just a massive fan of both their visual editor in the website, the current one, not the old one that I used a million years ago. Yeah. And it wasn't awful back then, but I mean, these days we've seen better UIs,
Yeah.
But it's really good today. And then also that experiment throughput kind of aid that web has, I just really want in, full stack. And then, the one other really kind of great thing, and I can't stress, full channel's ability to omni-channel test or full stack's ability to omni-channel test. Like, omnichannel testing is wicked hard in any other tool that isn't integrating in the backend. It's almost impossible, really. But full stack optimizely makes that really straightforward because it's all the same kind of code everywhere. So it's all very familiar for any dev encountering it.
It builds itself as like a platform. So, and it seems like the A/B testing experimentation is a piece of it. What other kind of features does it have? Does it like you to stay on the platform, and does it have the integrations that allow you to go off to something like Mixpanel or stuff like that?
Yeah. Okay. So full stack's the one that's most robust there. Mm-hmm. And that's definitely a huge boon and positive that I love. Like, we ship optimized data into Snowflake, into Heap, into really anywhere. But they have, hundreds of connectors for the data.
Okay.
And then they've also got, just really great export functionality if you're just a spreadsheet guru, Okay. Like most of my executives just want the spreadsheet output, especially these like financial executives that are in the loan space.
For sure.
And then like in both tools, but especially full stack, the segmentation and targeting is so cool. And every experiment platform is going to allow you to target by whatever data you're feeding into it. And so your targeting really is as powerful as your instrumentation. In this case with Optimizely, the thing that really, made my eyes wide as saucers when I was bumping into it in full stack was I can take an experiment that it has a strong stat sig, but a failing rate. And this is like really common, advice. I can then slice that data down to find the segmentation that actually does have stat sig and a positive result. And when I find those users, my next job as an experimenter is to find out how to get more of those users and less of the users that didn't want what I was testing. In the case where I know that that's the direction the company needs to go, but we can't figure out how to get there, finding that persona that I need to find that will have stat sig is really critical. What's really cool is I don't have to do any work around getting that report out from Optimizely. Like when I did this previously, I would have to export all the data into some sort of warehouse, especially a warehouse built to provide me analytic querying that's really efficient, right?
Yep.
That's painful because I also have to deal with my own stat sig calculation at that point for each slice I make. Optimizely lets me take an experiment and then that's completed and then peel apart the data in their UI and then create a new readout of a segment, and it will tell me what that stat sig is. That said, it's going to be the fixed horizon or frequentist like look at that stat sig because it has no ability to do the error control that it was doing during the test run with the segment I targeted, right? So when I shrink the segment and try and find the one that won and did better than the other segments, I have a risk around error control there. That's really the only low point of that feature. But generally, I'm segmenting it after the test is ended. And so it's fine to do a fixed horizon there. I know all the numbers and I can do the calc,
Yeah.
So that's amazing. I haven't really found a tool that has it built in like that.
Yeah, you would want to do it anyway. So if you don't do it in the app, you will do it outside of the app. So why not do it in the app already?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think that's what like makes Optimizely stand above the rest is that they've just gone in and said, what are actual business people, not academics, doing with experimentation, and why are they doing it? Oh, they're peaking all the time. Oh, they're running lots of metrics against the same experiment. Like they're running lots of variations to shortcut and speed up understanding and insight gain. And they're also always trying to slice their experiments down into new, smaller segments that might give them a better yield that they could then pivot and learn from. Those 4 things are so common in any experimenter's life that they just built their whole product around that stuff. And so it's just really fascinating to me that they've like locked in on basically the product way, right? Like understanding your consumer deeply and like being obsessed about them to the point where they'll even build their own stat engine and model around how they accurately feed me results while I'm constantly peaking, whether I want to admit it or not, right?
That sounds really cool. As a product person, that sounds really cool.
I think that covers all my like large loves of Optimizely.
What are the things that you don't like?
Okay, well, full stack's UI is, I don't know a really good way to politely say this. It's just not great. I get the information I need, but it feels like I'm 5 or 6 years ago inside of it. It feels a little clunky. It's not impossible. It's not as difficult as like navigating around, some people are going to laugh at this, but like navigating around Google Analytics for the first time, right? Like it's kind of a bear if you want to get into any sort of deep insights in Google Analytics that are beyond what's served up to you automatically. In the same way, it can kind of feel clunky in Optimizely full stack. Optimizely Web is where they're pouring all of their UX and design love into, though. Optimizely Web today is fantastic looking, very easy to use, really good reporting UIs, and really simple ways to like execute experiments. But for the most part, it's just very pedestrian. Like it's just going to get the job done, and it's not trying to be like this wow, beautiful amplitude look or something.
That leads us into the relationship with Optimizely customer success. Do you have a good relationship with them? Do you ever reach out to them for support?
I have never done that. I'm a big like RTFM guy. I'm all about reading the manual. Yeah. And I haven't encountered, but I'm biased, right? I've used like 6 different stacks. Yeah. So like
you might be the exception.
Yeah, I think I am. I don't know, maybe not. But like from what I do understand, their support team for the dev side has been really fantastic. But I'm still so new at the company. I'm only a month and a half in that I, have not had any cause to like reach out to the vendors where I couldn't just Google the question I have and get the answer. Like how are they determining stat sig? And then that led me down this huge rabbit hole of like, wow, they've built their own stat engine from these Stanford guys. Like this is pretty great. But yeah, I think they do obsess. It's very clear that they obsess about their customers from, a behavioral and how should we help them accomplish those behaviors point of view. But I don't know what their like actual like representation is like when they're hitting you up over email or trying to check in on you with like a success manager or something like that. Yeah. So like where like Braze is like really aggressive about that stuff in the best way, or even Amplitude is also just phenomenal at it. I would say that Optimizely is probably pretty quiet. But they probably don't know I exist. So.
You may not have a need for it quite yet.
Maybe after they hear this podcast, they might.
I hope so. Yeah.
Get the UI fixed or something.
Yeah, definitely.
So there's another question I had is in terms of ownership of Optimizely, does it sit with product, marketing, engineering, or does everyone kind of own it as a collective experience?
That's interesting. Yeah. The dev, if you're using full stack, the devs kind of have to own the instrumentation of it. There's no way around it. You can't, Google Tag Manage your way through it. even if it's just a script tag you're dropping in, devs are probably going to need to own the full stack side. Beyond that, I think it just depends on your culture at the company, right? Who's actually paying attention to experimentation? Probably the product managers, but maybe your data scientists as well. Those interested few are going to probably be wrangling Optimizely. For us, product owns it. The instrumentation of it, et cetera. But when we're going through the full stack lifecycle for Optimizely's products, I'm actually not the one creating the experiment. I'm creating the Jira card that says I want an experiment. And then the devs are diving and naming their variables, whatever they want, and then wiring up the eventing as specified, and then executing the code. But they kind of own the initial creation of it.
Okay.
And then each environment that you're deploying it against. So dev, Circle CI, staging, et cetera, devs are owning that as well. And then they generally will keep their hands off of the production deployment and let the product managers push the buttons for those. In most cases, the devs don't want those, nuclear launch codes.
Yeah.
Will be like any other story. It's just part of their dev stack.
That's right. Yeah. And then if something's going sideways, they would be owning it, because at least for the Optimizely full stack product, devs would be diving in, trying to understand why it's going sideways, while I'm jumping in, running down the data and trying to understand where the biasing is or something like that. But yeah, there's a clear distinction between instrumentation and overall strategy of ownership. And I think product generally, and I don't think this is exclusive to Optimizely, but in this case, it's special with their full stack product. You just have to have the devs involved.
It's just so robust. Yeah. So big.
Yeah. It's so big. Yeah. And it's touching so many things.
Sure.
Yeah, I don't have any other questions. I'm not sure if you have more questions.
This is really cool, because I'm thinking about, you mentioned 6% conversion rate increase. I'm thinking about the students. This is the first time they've encountered having to take a loan out. So being able to do these kind of experiments to where it makes the overall experience for them better, I think that's really cool and really probably beneficial for them in the end. So I like the work you're doing.
Yeah, definitely. And I just love that we can do these sorts of tests in such complicated ways, and probably where most people would skip trying to test it because they're on a front end only, or it's a WYSIWYG only, or it's just difficult. Optimizely makes the coding of things fairly simple. And so as an afterthought, we just tacked on, hey, let's measure the impact of switching out the engine behind the UI. And the impact was very statistically significant with the 6% increase. So 6 basis point increase. So pretty large increase between the two values for us, at least. So, and that's, I don't know, loan products have low volume quantities that you can't really work with in VWO or in Google Optimize, where it's just dangerous to make a decision on 60 users. But because of the way that Optimize is doing their stats engine, it's not. And that's kind of amazing. It's really critical, positive for them. I can't believe I forgot to mention that. I'm not used to working at companies that have low volume. The previous one I was dealing with 1 million users a day in each side of the variant, and so I was hitting stat sig in minutes, but I needed to wait for a cycle to make sure, Here I'm waiting for a cycle because I need users, right? And if I was on VWO, that would be very, very painful. But because we're on this kind of fancy custom, stats mix of decisioning with Optimizely, it just speeds up the read so fast. And I have a lot of confidence inside of that to a certain extent, right? Most of the time, experiments go sideways and you choose the wrong winner because you designed the test really badly, right? It's rarely the tool's fault.
That's true. Very true.
But in this case, with a low count of users, it's critical that Optimizely is the choice that
you get it right. Yeah, that you get it right. Your sample size is so small.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Well, excellent. Yeah, that's all the questions I had. Ken, I really appreciate you coming on again. Always very insightful having you on, getting a lot of great technical information. So I really do appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Ken. And I believe this will be our first episode for 2022.
It will, yes.
We need also to
You guys.
wish everyone Happy New Year and all the best for the new year.
Happy New Year to everybody, and appreciate all the support.
May you have many positive results in your experiments coming up.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Personally and professionally, for sure.
Definitely.
Awesome.
All right, fellas.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
See you guys.